Cecil Stedman, director of the Global Defense Agency and one of Invincible's most recognizable characters. Despite not being one of the show's colorful superheroes, Cecil manages to stand out to viewers through his incredible commitment to protecting Earth against all kinds of threats and the riveting drama which unfolds from his highs and lows with important characters like Invincible and Omni-Man. No matter where you sit on the decisions he makes or how he goes about them, it's clear to all that the Earth of Amazon's Invincible would have been in much more trouble without Cecil's guiding hand to steer the ship, since it doesn't seem like there's another person on the planet who could have led the Global Defense Agency in the way that he has. During all of this, one of the most intriguing aspects of the show is Cecil's relationships with some of the series' heroes throughout all of this. So today we're going to look at how Mr. Stedman would view One Punch Man's strongest heroes if he ever found himself taking the reins of the Hero Association instead. Sitch, it's time for that vacation. Cecil's on the job. And what better way to start than by highlighting how Cecil is willing to compromise some moral currency in order to ensure a safer world for the greater good. Much to some characters' dismay, Cecil is open to employing reformed, or at least remotivated, criminals in order to combat threats to global safety. This rubs not only some characters the wrong way, but even viewers themselves, with many debates raging around who is more in the right between Cecil and Mark once their methods of enacting justice clashed. Judging by where Cecil's shiny shoes stand on the matter, it's a given that Puri Prisoner would absolutely be a hero he is behind. Figuratively, not literally, since Puri Prisoner might like that. Cecil would certainly be uncomfortable with Prisoner's antics and past crimes. However, he'd realize that with monsters attacking cities on a regular basis and S-class worthy heroes hard to come by, sometimes you need to take all the help you can get in the battle against civilization threatening events. While a young Cecil may not have felt this way, the current Cecil we all know and love would certainly not pass up the opportunity to have a powerful bruiser dishing out damage in the name of public safety, even if the man's past actions do disgust him. Added to the fact that Prisoner is actually very easy to work with and incredibly motivated to serve and protect when he's not breaking and entering, if you catch my drift, Cecil likely would be able to look past Prisoner's degeneracy, since the hero always returns to prison and gives his all when fulfilling his role as an S-class hero. Cecil would probably make sure that he's never in the room alone with him though. But on the other end of the spectrum, we have someone who is an exemplary human being and someone who embodies all the right values for Cecil's ideal public hero, Tank Top Master. Don't worry, Tank Top fans, there'll be some videos in the future where this legend gets the respect he deserves in certain topics. And for this video, he'll have Cecil's respect too. Yes, Tank Top Master is pretty much nearly everything Cecil would want in a hero under his command. Strong, dedicated, incorruptible, and he shows up to do what he has to do for the people relying on him without complaints. If Cecil would have any issues, it'd mostly be that Tank Top Master, despite meaning well and doing well, isn't the brightest thinker overall and can be quite simple at times. Nor is he the strongest the S-Class has to offer and can't be relied upon for the gravest of challenges. With that being said though, Cecil would certainly think of him as someone trustworthy and would be happy that he's a hero who makes such a positive influence on the rest of the organization. His ability and attitude not only make it easy to work with him, but those qualities have founded numerous other heroes in the Tank Top faction who all help to protect those who need it most, making him a hero Cecil can point to for unruly heroes and say, why can't you be more like Tank Top Master? But one guy he won't be saying that about is this next one. Cecil would be wary of Drive Knight. He doesn't talk much, he stays secretive, and always behaves as if he's hiding something back. Even when he's appearing to be more open, it never quite feels completely forthcoming. Cecil wouldn't go as far as to think that Drive Knight would be working against them, but he certainly wouldn't feel at total ease when it comes to relying on Drive Knight, and he'd probably even attempt to have some surveillance on him at times in order to keep an eye on his activities, if suspicion ever heightened enough to where Cecil felt some routine checkups on him were necessary. Again, it's not to say that he'd think Drive Knight is evil, or working against them at the very least, but more so that he can't quite get a read on him and just what he might be capable of. Someone like Cecil wouldn't let an unknown variable like that linger too long without keeping tabs of some kind. I can already imagine some frosty conversations between the two where tense stares accompany cold verbal exchanges before Drive Night soon walks away, with Cecil holding that thoughtful glare we've seen him do from time to time. And if there's anyone who'd be Cecil's go-to operative when he needs something looked into, it'd be the undying hero known as Zombieman. With undercover work being his specialty, Cecil would no doubt make use of his detective, scouting and spying skills to keep an eye on anything he deems suspicious or threatening. Because of this, I think Cecil and Zombieman would have a good, stable relationship consisting of trust and respect, where Cecil likely views Zombieman as one of the more normal S-class heroes he can generally interact with in standard conversation, which may sound weird when referring to someone called Zombieman of all things. Since Zombieman has strong values and is a great hero with both emotional and social intelligence, he'd be a reliable member of Cecil's inner circle concerning important matters or when he's looking for another level-headed perspective on a situation. Pig God, however, would certainly make Cecil lose his appetite whenever the S-class hero is gorging his face nearby. And certainly if he's gorging himself on monsters. Cecil would probably be a little unsettled by Pig God's ability to eat nearly anything. However, I think he'd know through his social interactions with him and from his work out in the field that Pig God is a genuinely good guy who has no problem putting others first. Despite his unsettling eating habits, Cecil would appreciate his dedication to being an S-class hero, and it wouldn't take long for him to realize that Pig God is a harmless softie when it comes to other people, and the only beings who need to be worried around him are evil monsters. Cecil would absolutely like him, but he'd probably wish he didn't leave so many crumbs on the table during S-class meetings. And he'd also prefer that this one guy didn't pose all the time during those S-class meetings. Superalloy Darkshine. I bet you can already hear inside your head Cecil sighing and saying something like, "Yes, Darkshine, you don't need to keep asking me if your muscles make us feel safe. We're very lucky to have you. Now back to the meeting." Obviously, I'm no Walter Goggins, but you get the idea. Cecil would certainly believe that Darkshine is a good person, but it's possible he'd also gauge a level of insecurity from the S-class hero too. He'd probably think to himself that Darkshine doesn't need to be so concerned with what everyone else is thinking about him and to focus on matters at hand. Overall, he'd appreciate that someone so strong and someone who trains so hard puts the fruits of their results into protecting innocence. I also think he'd be something of an unofficial bodyguard for Cecil, someone he takes with him to places where he thinks it may get dicey as a form of protection, mostly since Darkshine is incredibly powerful, easy to speak with, and practically a living shield. Someone not so easy to interact with, however, would be Flashy Flash. Cecil would likely view the ninja as someone who's pretty arrogant, though would be very aware that he has the power to back up such an attitude. He'd be a little unsure of how to take him in social interactions since Flashy Flash is quite closed off to the common person, but Cecil would be just glad that he's on their side. Cecil usually likes to have some measure of control, and Flashy Flash usually marches to the beat of his own drum, so I don't think they'd get along fantastically, but it wouldn't be a bad relationship either. Flashy Flash could irritate him with his attitude a few times, but Cecil would likely just let it go as long as he did his job efficiently, which Flashy Flash is very good at doing. Speaking of efficiency, you don't get much better expertise out there than from Atomic Samurai himself. While Cecil most likely isn't very knowledgeable on the intricacies of the samurai way, he'd for sure be impressed with how damn good Kamikaze is with the sword. Reliable, incredibly powerful, and always eager to strike something down, Atomic Samurai is like a wet dream for anyone in charge of dispatching superheroes against monstrous threats. And similarly to how Tank Top Master inspires more heroes to step up as tank toppers, Cecil would be just as thrilled to see how an S-class hero is responsible for causing 3 strong A-class heroes to be within the hero association. Cecil would look at that as a deluxe edition of an S-class hero. Buy one to get 3 bonus heroes included. Knowing that Atomic and his disciples are around would give him peace of mind for wherever they're stationed, meaning this S-class hero is one of the ones Cecil doesn't have to spend any time worrying about. Which is something of the opposite for Metal Knight. Contrary to what I may have just suggested, I think Cecil would ensure that the Hero Association and Metal Knight work together as often as possible. Why? Well, I think he'd want to keep an eye on him the best he could, even if it meant dealing with his drones instead of in person. Metal Knight is a very secretive fellow, and judging by the way he behaves and operates at times, almost as if he's doing things for himself rather than everyone else, even if he vocally frames it as his efforts being for the good of public safety. Whether that's true or not would not matter to Cecil, who would certainly be keeping an eye on him. Cecil's not naive enough to let a secretive guy stockpile mass amounts of weapons without harboring some suspicion for his final motives, so even though they'd work together often so Cecil can keep tabs on him, Cecil would never lay out all of the cards to Metal Knight. Whatever they're working on, Cecil would always make sure he's one step ahead, at least from his own perspective, and may even sometimes withhold certain pieces of information from Metal Knight in case he turned out to be untrustworthy sooner or later. Cecil doesn't feel comfortable with things he can't account for, and Metal Knight has a lot of secret firepower he can't account for. This next hero's a lot more open in his behavior though. Metal Bat. Cecil would know that Metal Bat's a good kid. While that rough exterior and threatening attitude can convince some people otherwise, Cecil's been around the block long enough to know a guy who's willing to put it all on the line for the safety of everyone else when he sees one. And Metal Bat is that guy. Cecil would probably try to steer him in the right direction the best he could so that he becomes a little less unpredictable, but he'd absolutely ensure that Metal Bat is kept focused and that his sister is always protected. I think Metal Bat, sooner or later, would get the feeling that Cecil is the real deal himself too. One of the association suits who isn't afraid to get in the trenches with everyone else when it comes down to it, like Sekingor. And that'd breed a strong respect between the two, where Cecil becomes one of the few executives who Metal Bat is more than happy to hit home runs for. Hey, if you're having a good time with the video so far, don't forget to hit that like and subscribe button for me. Otherwise, I'm getting Cecil to sick the reanimin on you. Genos, the demon cyborg, would certainly get onto Cecil's radar quickly, explosive firepower and a drive to eradicate every monster in sight. Cecil would love how up for his job he is. However, with Genos always ending up in pieces somewhere or another, Cecil would point out to him that he needs to be more cautious when he's approaching monsters so that he doesn't put himself out of the game permanently. He'd be able to tell from his own experience handling many heroes that Genos' motivation is in the right place, but he needs to cool those jets a little in his approach so that he can keep saving the day for many years to come. Otherwise, those increasing failures may stop him for good one day. Genos would be one of Cecil's go-to guys, and he'd certainly be impressed that he's taken a certain lesser hero under his wing in the process. You know the one I'm talking about, the bald guy. And speaking of Genos needing to learn, well, Cecil would say that he's strong and has all the potential in the world, but he needs to learn from the best of the best. He needs to learn from King. He'd say, do you think King was able to defeat all of those world-threatening monsters by rushing in without a plan? Do you think King left himself open to attack in the face of danger? Cecil's reports show that King has defeated some of the strongest monsters the Earth has ever seen, and in record time. Sometimes Cecil takes a moment out of his busy day to close his eyes and think about just what might have happened to this planet if King wasn't around. The thought scares him, and every time that relieved sigh reveals how lucky he and the rest of the world feels to have King on their side. No matter what comes Earth's way, no matter who challenges the Hero Association, no matter where they come from, Cecil knows that as long as they have King, it doesn't matter if it's even the Viltrum Empire itself, because no enemy stands a chance in hell. And when something comes along that threatens the existence of humanity itself, Cecil has one sentence that has never, could never, and will never fail him. Donald, get the King engine. But with King keeping the present safe, Cecil would know for a fact that the future lies with the Child Emperor. Young, bright, and brilliant, Cecil would already be working toward raising Child Emperor as the one who will hold the keys for the future. He'd admire the kid's strong sense of justice, his impressive leadership at such an age, and his incredible mind, which has proven time and time again to be the demise of humanity's aggressors. Cecil would consult him on a lot of matters involving technology, strategy, and monster countermeasures, but would still remember that he's just a child at the end of the day. He would be more than aware that he still has some maturing to do. and that he can't put too much on his shoulders, especially when there are so many other great heroes available to share the burden. Cecil would have complete faith in Isamu, but wouldn't leave the burden of his own responsibilities to a kid, even if he is a boy genius. Sometimes they'd clash, and sometimes Cecil would need to be firm in reminding him who is in charge, and that even if Isamu is smarter than him, Cecil knows a lot more about the world and making the hard decisions. But through it all, every experience would be Cecil sharpening Child Emperor to one day be someone who leads the Hero Association like no one else ever could. And experience is something this next one doesn't lack. We're talking about Silverfang. Cecil would adore Bang for being one of the more normal heroes who is easy to work with. With a bunch of eccentric personalities in the S-Class under his watch, Bang being someone who just gets on with things and is, more or less, a behaved old man when he's not trying to coax someone into learning Water Stream Rock Smashing Fist, well, it'd just be one less thing for Cecil to worry about in a world where he's already worrying about constant monster attacks. Cecil would probably not have any problem ever admitting, be it to Bang or to others, that he's outright amazed at what he has achieved with martial arts alone. To stand among the very best of professional heroes through sheer fighting technique. And, added to that, the age at which he's still performing to this level. A lot of people take for granted that Bang is around 81 years old when they speak about him. This man is 81 and he's still capable of all kinds of craziness. Pour one out for any villain who had to deal with this man when he was 20 or 30 years younger. If anything, despite how much Cecil would appreciate him, he may even begin getting on his case about training a successor to replace him for when he retires. Cecil is always looking ahead after all, and it won't be easy to replace the gap of power, skill, and experience which will be left when Silverfang finally gives up the hero life. Also, Bang would probably note that Cecil has a similar hairstyle to his older brother, Bomb. Somehow I forgot to include Watchdog Man in the initial recordings, so I'm adding him in post right here. Cecil would probably be unsure of exactly how serious to take Watchdog Man at first, but after realizing he keeps the most dangerous city in the world completely monster free and that he does it with such ruthless efficiency, Cecil would know that he is truly man's best friend. If anything, Cecil might even be somewhat frustrated that such an incredibly useful hero is confined to a single city, since he would likely want to use him wherever he could. However, he'd begrudgingly accept Watchdog Man's stationary nature due to how it keeps Q City completely free of danger in what would otherwise be the most disastrous city of all without him. Cecil would tell the Hero Association members of Q City to ensure that the protector of Q City is always well fed and happy, and to give that dog a bone whenever he wants one, because they cannot afford to lose Watchdog Man's heroic expertise. Whew, you're still here? This video's not done yet though. Yeah, I know you've been waiting for everyone's favorite superhero brat. There's no one quite like Tatsumaki, and Cecil would be finding that out the hard way when she's protesting his orders, moaning about his decisions, and constantly telling him about how she can do all of this on her own without his stupid orders or unwanted advice. She'd rag on him like she does everyone else, calling him whatever name she sees fit. But at the end of the day, Cecil would take it with that serious look on his face he always has. Why? Because he knows that she's the trump card of humanity. He'll put up with her outbursts, her complaints, her tantrums, because he knows that despite it all, she's one of the best weapons they have against mysterious beings. She's one of the pillars that protects all of humanity. Cecil might get a little fatigued from her antics, but he'd always do what he can to keep her on side. She's a handful who is more than worth it at the end of the day, and he'd no doubt get very good at covering up her messes with the Hero Association resources to keep her image as clean as he can. Hey, that's why they pay him the big bucks to handle the S-Class. And finally, we finish the S-Class off with the most mysterious man himself, Blast. Cecil would admittedly not get a lot of face time with Blast, and that'd play a lot into his perception of the #1 hero. Mysterious, Cecil would be aware of his exploits out in the beyond, which keeps him away from Earth, but while he would accept and understand that what Blast does is for the good of humanity, even if he can't see it for himself, he'd still be frustrated with the fact that he can't reliably reach or trust him to show up when the time comes. Cecil, with all of his experience, would know that he can't rely on Blast to save the day. He'd almost write him off in a sense, taking every measure he can to provide for a world where he can't rely on Blast to show up. And that's why he'd be working so diligently with the rest of S-Class, because someone like Cecil would never put all of his eggs in a basket which he can't find when he needs to make an omelette. Cecil would know that Blast is the best, but the best who isn't around when he needs him on Earth isn't worth much to him. Cecil wouldn't be happy with not having a reliable way to get a hold of Blast, but he'd understand it, and he'd do all he could to make sure it was never a problem. Amai Mask would be someone Cecil has to work with from time to time, given he has a say in S-Class matters too. He'd trust his expertise but may clash with the A-Class hero when promising heroes get rejected from moving up due to his intervention. Cecil would always want new talent in the fight against the most powerful monsters, and with Amai Mask blocking their entry due to his own standards, it may frustrate Cecil at times to know the ranks of S-Class won't expand. However, at the end of the day, Cecil would put his faith in Amai Mask since he knows that, despite it all, Amai Mask's criteria is for the good of humanity, and he's not the kind of person to take his role lightly. However, Cecil may get annoyed if Amai Mask decides to continue with concert bookings or acting shoots despite disaster threats occurring. And finally, we have that one hero who always seems to be with Genos. Caped Baldy, was it? Cecil doesn't exactly know why he and Genos seem to be inseparable, but he's gauged that Caped Baldy must be some kind of martial arts master who teaches Genos fighting techniques or spiritual philosophy, since Demon Cyborg seems so intent on always calling him master despite being a superior S-Class hero. Ever since that rumor got out about Caped Baldy stealing credit for victories, Cecil mostly would just assume he's some hero trying to cash in some credit by hanging around an S-Class. But as long as he's helping fight threats, then it's better than a hero doing nothing. Still, Cecil would remind Genos from time to time to keep an eye on Caped Baldy out there, since he's obviously not as strong as Genos is when it comes to confronting demon and dragon level threats. To which Genos would usually say there's nothing to worry about when it comes to his master. Maybe Cecil will pay more attention to him one day when he's not busy handling the S-Class and managing attack responses throughout the cities every day. And that about wraps it up. Thanks for watching, like the video if you enjoyed this, and let me know what S-Class relationship dynamic you'd like to see the most for Cecil from Amazon's Invincible.